welcome to the training webinar again. I'm Dale Franks. Today we're going to talk about timeline activity types, and it's a rather basic function of Process Director to choose different activity types. So this is not one of the more complex webinars that we'll do. It is more of a beginner level webinar. So it's not something we've talked about much. In fact, it doesn't look like I've talked about this since 2022. So it has been about 2.5 years since we discussed it, but it's always good sometimes even to just go over the basics like timeline activity types. And that's what we're going to talk about today. There we go. Let's be sure that my screen is sharing, and it appears that it is. So here are all of the timeline activity types that are available in Process Director. Let's talk about setting up these activities themselves. When you open up a process timeline activity, so you open up the timeline, you create an activity, and then you open up its properties. On the activity tab for every activity, the activity types are all listed in the appropriately labeled activity type drop-down control. When you create a process timeline activity, the user activity will always be the default activity type. This is intentional. Most of the time, the activities that you create are in fact going to be user activities because you are modeling a process, and as part of that you need to specify what all of the different users are going to do as part of the process. So every time you create an activity, this is what you see. This is the standard timeline activity. You don't have to do any sort of configuration of the activity type. It's only when you're using a non-activity or non-user activity that you need to set the activity type. Now, the options that you see for a user activity type, participants, results, and the advanced options, which we'll have to take a look at briefly. Every time you choose a different activity type, the tabs that you see at the top of the properties dialog box will always change. So if I change this to a notify activity, the participants and results activities or tabs simply disappear off of the UI. Notify activities are the simplest type, and all they do are email notifications. So if you look at the advanced options, there are some, two to be precise, but for the most part, when you pick a notify activity, you get that particular tab. But for all of the other activities, they each have their own unique configuration tab. So a process activity has a process tab, a script activity has a script tab, and so forth. So as you make changes to each of these activity types, you are going to see an extra tab, and the second tab is always going to change. The user activity is a little unusual in that it actually has two tabs. It has the participants and the results tab. We're not going to spend too much time talking about the user activity itself. I have an entire 2-hour webinar on user assignment where we go into the configuration of the user activity in excruciating detail. So all we really need to keep in mind about the user activity for today's purpose is that it assigns a task to an end user. Now, I have to be careful about using the terms task and activity because they aren't the same thing. Unfortunately, even I tend to use the term task and activity interchangeably as if they were the same object, but in fact, they are not. A timeline activity refers to any type of activity. A user activity is just a type of timeline activity. User activities, however, create a secondary or child object called a user task. The timeline activity, the user activity type, specifies when the task begins, when the task is supposed to end, what happens if we reach the due date and that task does not end or has not been completed by the user. It also specifies how the task is going to be assigned, who is going to be assigned the task. But the task runs separately. It is a separate object. When the activity starts, it invokes the task, and the task starts immediately. Now the activity is running, and the activity is going to run until the user completes the user task. When the task ends, it invokes the end task event of the timeline activity, which ends the timeline activity. So the activity starts the task, and completing the task ends the activity. So they are very closely interrelated and intertwined, but they're not the same thing. In fact, if we go into anywhere where we can look at a condition, so we'll open, create condition, we'll add a little condition here to the condition builder, and let's open up the choose system variable dialog box. Note that there are timeline activity system variables, but there are also, and this may not be the best place to try to invoke it, but there are task start dates and task due dates. Those are separate. And in fact, for some timeline, or not for timeline activities, for some conditions, and we would have to find, in fact, let's pop open a form. I have one in here. So let's go into a form. Maybe we can see it a little better there. So let's go to the form and let's go to the entire form is read only when. And once again, let's open the choose system variable dialog box, and that's process, but I'm trying to find some place where the process task, because this is just a process. Oh, there we go. There it is, task, right up there. So there is the task that is associated with this activity, and indeed not associated with this activity, but an integral part of the user activity. The whole point of a user activity is to create a task to assign to a user. So you can see here, if we look at the choose system variable dialog box and we go look at the task itself, you can see that the task itself has different properties, some of which are quite different from the timeline activity properties. So the timeline activity is sort of the basket in which we determine what process director is going to do at a specific time when that activity invoked. The task is the actual assignment that gets placed on a user for something that they need to do. Only user activities invoke tasks. All of the other activities have no tasks that are assigned to them. So it's important to keep in mind that even though we talk about tasks synonymously with the user activity, just keep in mind they aren't the same thing, and the task is a child object and a separate object than the user activity. Indeed, the task itself in the process director database, for those of you who are sort of database savvy people, it has its own table. There is the process task, and there is tables, process task and process task user. Those are all tables that are filled out when the task begins, and it tracks the process or the progress of that task while the user completes it. So for a user activity, there are, as we mentioned, a couple of major tabs. There is the participants tab for the activity, which determines who is actually going to be doing the task when it is invoked. There's the results tab, where you can define what results the users will be allowed to select to complete their task, and those results determine what the activity result is when they complete it during the task. So the task result and the activity results are, whenever the activity ends, synonymous. Well, kind of synonymous, because each user gets assigned a task, and the result of that task is specifically tied to each user at the task level. At the activity level, if you have multiple users assigned to an activity, there are going to be multiple tasks assigned during that activity. Each user will receive their own task assignment. So if I have 4 users, 4 tasks are going to be created whenever the activity begins. Each of the results of those tasks are directly tied to those user tasks. However, at the timeline activity level, if you have 4 different users and those 4 users choose 4 different results, all 4 of those results will be listed in a comma-separated list as the result of the activity. So it is important to make that distinction, especially as a process manager, when you're going in and trying to find out who did what and what happened when. Those are all tracked differently, the tasks and the activities, so just keep that in mind. Another thing that, now it's not unique to the user task, but there are some tasks that simply don't have a due date tab. But there is the due date tab, which determines what is going to happen when that task completes. And you have various ways of calculating the due date, whether you want it from the actual activity start or the configured activity start, or whatever the lesser time limit is from the minimum or the minimum time calculated from what is the actual activity start and what was the configured activity start. Which of those two takes up less time? That's the one that we'll choose to set the due date. What that allows you to do is to cover up for slippages in time where somebody took a little too long to do their task and complete their activity. The next activity gets assigned and says, okay, well, this person took an extra day. So if we calculate from the minimum, I'm gonna shave a day off of their time to do the activity so that the actual time of the overall project slips as little as possible. This may not be fair to the second user who has to bear the brunt of completing their activity quicker because somebody before them took too long, but that's all configurable by you. We're actually going to have to come back here and look at the due date tab in the context of the wait activity. But the one thing that is important when you have a user activity and you're on the due date tab is what to do if they hit their due date and if that due date expires and nobody has completed the task. Well, you can add additional users, you can replace the existing users and add someone else. So, for example, you can take a task away from the original task assignee and assign the task now to their supervisor, so you can escalate the task. Or you can cancel the entire thing, either cancel the activity or cancel the timeline. So you do have some choices on the due date about whether you want to escalate or cancel the activity based on whether we've passed the due date, or of course you also have the default option, which is just to do nothing and to let the task continue to run, which is generally what you do. Unlike most other activity types, the Advanced Options tab is pretty beefy on the user activity because there are many options that you can implement for how you want to have the activity work, how you want tasks assigned, and indeed whether you want tasks assigned to anonymous users or not, or whether you want a user to be able to share tasks and to use shared delegation for the task whenever it gets assigned to them. So again, please look at the user assignment webinar for a detailed description of what all of these different activities are, because we do have 10 of them to go through. So we do need to move along. But this is going to be where you should spend some time whenever you're configuring a user activity to determine how you want the activity to work. Now, some of these are super important. So for example, if you have shared delegation implemented, so normal delegation is when you say, I want every task that is assigned to Diana to be automatically assigned to Barb. Usually you set up delegation for a specified period of time. Shared delegation doesn't work that way. So if you have somebody usually at an executive or managerial level, who gets assigned tasks, perhaps a lot of tasks, and they may not have time to complete them all. Well, you can allow task sharing by clicking that checkbox right there. And in the shared delegation section of IT admin, you can specify the people who are asking or who are authorized to complete a task for their user principal, actually, the person who they're completing tasks for. By the way, if you have questions, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a Q&A button. So please be sure if you have a question, because I see someone raise their hand. I don't know whether that was intentional or not. If you do have a question, click the Q&A button, ask your question in the Q&A, type it in. I'll get a little notification and I'll answer your question when it pops up. So if that raising of the hand was accidental, then don't worry, I've lowered your hand. But anyway, back to task sharing. So inside the IT admin area, when you go to the user admin section, you get to the delegations page, you can say, for Diana, I want her delegates to be Rob and Eric. Okay, great. So now when Diana gets assigned a task, if you click this allow task sharing checkbox for that task, then Eric and Rob can actually go into a knowledge view, see that task. They can open it up, and because they have shared delegation, they can go in and complete that task for Diana. But they can't do it unless you click that button. So shared delegation, to be able to share that task, you must explicitly click on that allow task sharing. Similarly, if you want to assign a task to someone who is not in your organization, you'll need to click the allow anonymous users to be assigned tasks by email address. So you have a form field, usually a text field, where you ask people to put in an email address, and you want to assign it to an anonymous user, or at the very least an unauthenticated user. We have an email address, so technically they aren't anonymous, but they are unauthenticated, and the email address is just a string of text. So I have this email address in a text field. I can assign the task via that text field to an anonymous user. It'll grab that email address and it will assign a task to that user, send them a special email for external users or who are not authenticated in Process Director, which has a special link that will allow them to open up the form and complete that task. But it will only do so if you click that checkbox right there. So there are two very important functions that you do on a fairly regular basis, but they only work if you go to the Advanced Options tab and click those two checkboxes. Outside of that, pretty much everything else is just standard for all user tasks, and all user tasks have the same options. So let's move on to the notify task. This is probably, I was about to say it's probably the simplest. It's not the simplest. End process is the simplest, but the notification task is probably the second simplest activity type because there's not much to it. You don't even have any specific tabs that are unique to the notify activity type. All you really have is the Notifications tab. The Notifications tab is different than what you would usually see on every other task type. And the difference is we remove one property from the Notifications tab. The purpose of the Notifications tab is to send email notifications to people who are not task assignees. One of the bigger mistakes that I see, especially for people who are relatively new to Process Director, is that they try to use a notification activity to notify task assignees of their task. And the task assignee sees the email and they see a link to the form and they open the form and they're unable to complete their task because they do not see any of the task completion buttons at the bottom of the form or at the top or wherever you've decided to put it on that particular form. You have control over that. Usually, though, by default, it's at the bottom. And so, we get this question, well, hey, I've notified my users and they open the form and they can't complete their task. Well, yes, because you've created a notification activity. For a normal user task, indeed, for all user tasks, the Notifications tab is a little bit different because at the very top of the Notifications tab, you have this property, which by default is checked, that says Notify Participants when activity starts. And so what we'll see people do is they'll create their user activity. They'll go to the Notifications tab. They'll uncheck it. And then they'll create a Notify activity and say, okay, now I'll notify my users. Okay, well, notifying your users is the only thing you're going to do because that checkbox is important. It's missing here. And the reason it's missing and the reason that it exists in the user activity is because this specifically sends the user a link to their task that opens up the form in the context of the task. So when they click on the link and the form opens, their task completion buttons are on the form. We also see people who will turn that off and then they'll add a notification and say, okay, well, when the task starts, I want to, have Barb do her task. So let's say that Barb is the task assignee for this task. So they'll go in, they'll turn that off, and then they'll create a notification for Barb. Okay, you can do that. But again, when Barb receives her notification, it will not open the activity in the context of the task. There won't be any task completion buttons. This is essentially, in terms of allowing Barb to complete the task that's supposed to be assigned to her, this is useless because Barb is not going to be able to complete her task. This checkbox is important. All task assignees will receive their notification, and they will receive their notification in task context. Any notification that I add for a user activity, and I can add as many as I want, these are all non-task related notifications. So anyone who receives any of these emails will not be able to open up the form, which is usually what you open up. They simply won't be able to open that form in task context. All participants need to be notified via this checkbox right here. Those notifications will occur automatically. You do not need to manually add notifications for participants. For the notify task itself, there are no task notifications that you can make using a notify activity. All of the notifications you make will be done outside of task context. So it's important to remember that these are for non-participant notifications. And basically all you have to do is just add a notification and then choose who you want the notification to go to. It can be to, anybody who's available in Process Director, or with from form field, it can be anybody outside your organization. So we can send out emails to anybody, whether they're part of your organization or not, via the notification activity. And all the notification activity does is send a simple email that allows no one to complete a task. It's just an informational notification. So the only thing that you really have to configure on a notify activity are what notifications you want to send. And in most cases, you only want to send one or two, additional notifications. And since in the user activity itself, you have the ability to also, on the notify tab, add those notifications. Generally, you only need the notify activity to notify people of something that is happening outside of the task. Perhaps you've reached a certain point in your process timeline, so you want everybody to know the initial approval is finished, right? So you might have two approval loops. You go through the first approval loop, and assuming that everybody approves it, you end the loop, and then maybe you want to send out a notification that says, okay, the first round of approvals is done. And you might give them a link to the form so they can open it up and, confirm that the form is where it's supposed to be. And then after this notification is sent, you might start a second round of approval with a different approval loop with different approvers. So this is largely just a courtesy notification for things that happen outside the context of a specific task. Because if you have a specific user task, you can do the notification there. And of course, there's a notification tab for all of the other activities. So you can make a notification that, a specific activity has begun. Next is the process activity type. Now, this activity type, and the second activity here, is a process activity. And again, I have an entire webinar on processes and sub-processes and the differences between synchronous and asynchronous processes. And for a synchronous process, which is to say a process that you will call as a child process, and while that child process is running, you want to pause the execution of the timeline that called it. And so when you call using the process activity type, you can call a sub-process to run, and your main process, the process that ran the process activity, will pause. It'll stop its execution completely, and it will not resume until whatever process that you call completes running. Once it has completed, then the main process will automatically begin running again. So in this particular case, I have my main process, 03 process. So process number 3, and then I have a sub-process, 3A, that I want to run. So for this timeline activity, when I set it to the process type, a process tab is created, or at least displayed, so that you can select what process you want to start when the activity begins. So we're going to set the process 3A sub-process to begin whenever this activity is invoked. You have a couple of options. I can take all of my objects in this timeline package, so the form, all of the attachments, and I can copy them to the child process, so process 3A. I can copy all of the objects to process 3A, and similarly, any objects that are in process 3A, or which get added while that process is running, can automatically be copied back up to the parent process when process 3A completes. So I always have the ability to transfer objects from a parent process to a child process. Now, for version 6.1.300, we have a change to the way this works. For all earlier versions of Process Director, when you run the process activity, and similarly, when you run the run process custom task, which is what you use for asynchronous processes. In other words, processes that can run uh, at the same time as the main process runs. The main process doesn't pause for an asynchronous process. But in both cases, they both have these properties for copying from the parent to the child and vice versa. For all versions prior to 6.1.300, I think maybe we added it even a little earlier, maybe in 6.1.205-ish or so. But very recently, we changed the way this works. For all earlier versions, this would only transfer the objects one level. So if I wanted to transfer objects in the timeline package to the child process, it would only transfer them to the immediate process, this O3A sub process. That would be the only process that would receive these objects, plus it would be the only process from which objects could be copied back up to the top. So it only went one level. We've expanded that now. So there may be situations in which process 03A, subprocess, invokes its own subprocess, which would take me down to a third level. Well, if that happens, I'm going to want to transfer all of the objects down to that third subprocess. When that third subprocess works or finishes, I'm also going to want to transfer all of those objects, attachments, forms, whatever, back up to its parent and ultimately back up to, well, if there are 3 generations, I'm going to pull it back up to the grandparent process. So I can actually now copy all of these objects down through multiple levels as long as there is a clear chain from the parent process to the child process to the grandchild process. Then all of those objects will be copied back up. So rather than going through just a single level, so basically everything from version 6.0 and below, certainly. Now everything goes through multiple levels. So we've always been able to track that chain, and now we have tracked it and now have multi-level transfers of those objects from the parent to the child. As I said, this is a synchronous process. So the process activity type will automatically pause the parent process while the child process runs. So if we go back here to our timeline activity types and I just kick off the process and I run it, then I'm going to get my initial, well, it's not really a form, it's the built-in form that is hard-coded into Process Director since I don't have a form for any of this. But now I'm in activity 1 of my process. Now remember, activity 2 is our process activity. So I'm going to go ahead and complete activity 1. Okay, well, what's happening? My form went away. Well, what is happening is that if I go into my user profile, I still have an accessibility form running. Let me kill this real quick so that it just goes away. Thank you. Now here is my sub process. I should also refresh this so that we can see what is going on. And those are all well, those are all the wrong processes. So it's not refreshing here. Well, get rid of those. Okay. Not sure why nothing is showing up in running processes, but at least in my task list, I can see that I do have a task running for the sub process. So if I open that up, I can go ahead and complete that sub process. and it will go away. And my task list has now refreshed, and I am back in the main process, and I'm running activity 3 of that process. So the main process paused while the sub process was running, and I had an active sub process activity. When I completed it, my main process, process number 3, began. So that is the process activity type. Now let's talk about the script activity type. The script activity type enables you to run some custom code whenever the activity runs. Now, to run a script, you have to have the license for the Process Director SDK to allow you to create your own custom ASCX controls, which I've created for this particular example. And the script needs to reside in the content list. So in my case, the script resides right here. It is O4A sample script. In fact, we can take a look at that sample script. It doesn't do much, but let's go ahead and save it and then open it so we can take a look at what it does. It does one very simple thing. So here is my script. I wrote all of this just to write this one line of code. I am going to pass a parameter, which we'll talk about in a second, to this script. And this script is just going to create a entry in the logs. So bp.log0 is just going to throw an entry into the internal log that says webinar script : and then it will say whatever parameter I pass it. So super simple script. So I have to have the SDK, and I have to have the script somewhere in the content list. So obviously here in my content list in the timeline activity types folder, there is where my sample script resides. Once I have the sample script and it is uploaded into the content list, now it's available for assignment or use via a process timeline activity, or indeed a form or anywhere else I need to use it. However, I'm going to use a script, it does need to reside in the content list. So for this particular activity type, I will choose the script activity type, which will give me a script tab in Process Director. And that script tab is going to ask me for two things. First thing it's going to ask me is, what script do you want to run? So what is your script file? This is obviously a content picker so that I can click on it, navigate through my content list, find my sample script, and assign that to the script file. Now, my script does have a parameter. So I will pass it a parameter. In fact, I should probably, where's my downloads? There we go. Let me reopen that so we can look at what my script actually does. So for the script, I have this, well, oh, look, a new version of Visual Studio Code. So for this script, I have a parameter that gets passed to it. It's just a string, so it's just text that gets passed. And then once that text called pparm gets passed, it just writes it to the log. That's all it does. So I have a parameter that this timeline script asks. Now I only have one, or this timeline script asks for. Now I only have one parameter, this string pparm. You might have multiple parameters, right? So, I mean, you might have, since I'm, so creative with names. So it might look like this. So I have string pparm and string pparm2. If we go back and we look at our sample script, here is my script parameter. Now, I only have a single parameter in the script, so I only need to pass it a single script parameter. If I had multiple parameters, like it does now with parm1 and parm2, I would need to set this off with as a comma separated list. So in that case, we'll say that parameter one, well, you really don't want a comma in a comma separated list if you're not actually passing a comma. So I have parameter one, and then I would need to add a comma and then toss in, parameter two. So now I have a script that says that will assign the values parameter one and parameter two to each of the parameters. So just as I have them separated by a comma here, I need to separate them by a comma here so that I'm actually passing it the comma separated list as an actual list. So in my case, I have this that is the parameter that I'm going to pass. And of course, in my script itself, this second parameter doesn't exist. This is what the actual script is. So with that, I can now run. So let me proceed without saving everything here. So we can go in here and I can find my script activity and I can run it. It'll say, are you sure you want to do this? Yes, I do. The process has started. Now, I don't have any user activities or anything, so there's nothing for me to do. The process is not only started, the process is now done. But I can go into the troubleshooting section, run into my logs, and here was the test I did earlier this morning, and here is the run that I just made at 10:41:21 seconds with my text. And this is the text that I specified inside my script. So script runs just fine. I wouldn't expect it not to run fine because, well, there's not much that script does. The next is the form actions activity type. The form actions activity type basically allows me to add and swap out forms in a process. So in this particular case, I have two forms. I have my original form, which is labeled, quite logically, original form, and I have my second form, which is labeled similarly so that I know which forms are which in my process when I run the sample. In the process timeline itself, I have two form actions activities. Activity 2 and Activity 4 are both form actions activities. You can tell because of the type of icon they have. Activities 1, 3, and 5 are all user activities, and they're there specifically so that I can see what form it is that I'm using for that particular activity. The cool thing about the form actions activity. So on my activity tab, I select form actions from the dropdown. I get a form options tab in the UI. And the very first thing it wants to do is know, okay, well, what form do you want to use? And so I can pick second form. So now I've got a second form, and that form will be added to the process timeline instance whenever this activity runs. The second option, which is set by default, takes this form that I have just added to the process, or the process instance. It takes this form, and it will make it the default form instance for the timeline. So I might have one form, and in fact, in this case, I do, in fact, have one form that the user would use to submit the process timeline. And then I have a second form that I can swap out for that so that in subsequent activities, I can use that second form to fill out data. And then I can swap it out again, which I've done with activity 4 by swapping it back to the original form. Now, in both cases, if we go down here to the bottom, there is an add new form instance property. Now, it has a couple of options. The default option is to add a new form instance only if the form does not already exist in the package. So in this particular case, if we look at activity one, and well, let's not look at activity one. Let's look at the options. So the form for timeline is the original form. So once this timeline starts, and I can start it just from scratch, just by running the timeline, or I can start it by submitting the original form, because if I go back to the original form, I believe I have the original form set up. I do not have the original form set up to start that process when the form is submitted. So in this case, if I submit the form, it's not going to work. So, but it will work if I kick off the form or kick off the process itself. So let's go back to my form actions. So the way that I have it currently configured, this process is going to be called, and that process is just going to be kicked off independently. So in this case, this process is invoked by some other action than submitting the form. That is not the normal way that processes are invoked, but it is also not a super unusual way to invoke processes. Sometimes you invoke a process, say, from a goal. So you've gone, you have a goal that checks an external database, maybe pulls back some data. The example that I use in the goal webinar is I look for some unprocessed invoices. If I have any unprocessed invoices, it invokes a process to call out each of those uninvoiced or unprocessed invoices and create a process to process those invoices and get them into the process director system, because I pulled that data from some external system. Okay, great. Well, that is perfect example of a process that is being invoked automatically because of the state of some data in an external system, like an accounting or ERP system. And there's a change to that data. I want to do something in Process Director. In the proximate example, I'm gonna want to process some invoices. So I'm going to need to kick those processes off independently. There is no form submission. We're not going to fill out the form until I process the invoice. So in a case like that, I pull the data, I create a new copy of the invoice form. I start the invoice processing process. I take all of the data from the external database and I stick it in the invoice form, and then someone gets assigned a task to process the invoice. So the form exists whenever the process timeline starts. And so that's what happens in this case. When I start this process timeline and it creates a new timeline instance, it's automatically going to add the original form to it. So I've got a timeline instance, and now I've got a form instance of the original form associated with it. But then in activity 2, I'm going to run this form options or this form actions activity, and by default, it will add a new form instance only if the form does not already exist in this package. So this process timeline instance started. It attached an instance of the original form. That's the only thing that this process has attached to it. So when I get here with this set to only if the form does not already exist, it is going to add a new instance of my second form to the process. And since I have set this as the default form instance checked, after this activity runs, this second form will be the form instance that gets shown to all of the users for all subsequent activities. Or in this case, for one subsequent activity, activity 3. But then we go to activity 4 and I'm running it again. And in this case, I'm calling the original form, but I'm only going to add a new instance of it if the form does not already exist in the package, which means that my original form is now going to be, because I have set this as the default, this will now be the default form for my process. I have some other options here, although I would urge you to use caution in selecting them, because never add a new form instance means if this form instance does not exist in the process, the one that we've selected up here in form definition, if that does not exist in the process, it ain't going to add it. So that's usually not good. And also, every time task runs, well, that's really not good, because that means if this is a repetitive task and it's part of a loop and the loop gets reset, it's always going to add a new form instance every time. In most cases, that's not good either. So you want to exercise some caution with both of those. Now, as it happens for activity 4, because I know that the original form already exists, technically I could set this to never add a new form instance, and it'll always work fine because the form instance has already been added whenever the process timeline was invoked and the new instance was created. So I could do it in this case and it would be fine. But if I did that in activity 2, this never add form instance, everything would go kind of haywire. So for this particular process timeline, we can now go back to our activity types folder, and we can just run this thing. And we'll hit OK. And it will run my original form, which we saw a few minutes ago. Well, ultimately, it will run it and display it to me. It clearly needs to compile it. There we go. So there's my original form, and we can just throw in some data in the form field, and I can complete my task. Now, remember, I'm going to complete my task. It's going to hit that form actions activity, and it is going to swap out that form on me once it processes. Now, as it happens, my second form has its own unique form fields. And so I'm not going to see that original value that I placed in the original form. I have entirely new values here that I can put in my form field. Now I'm in activity 3. I can complete this activity, and it's going to hit the form actions activity again, and it's going to swap me back to my original form, which now puts me in activity 5, and I can go ahead and complete that activity. And if I go back into my form actions, well, actually, let's do it from here. Let's go back into form actions. Let's look at our completed timelines, and let's pop this one back open. And so here's my timeline properties. We'll go to the timeline items tab, and there are my 2 form instances that are now both attached to this process timeline. By the way, this is one of the reasons why we say all of your process or all of your attachments, your document attachments that you create should all be process attachments. Because if they're all process attachments, so all of my Excel files or Word documents or PDFs, whatever they may be, if they're all process attachments, then all I have to do is open up the timeline instance as I've done here and go to the timeline attachments tab, and it's going to give me all of the forms, because all forms that are used in a timeline instance, all form instances are process attachments. And so if all of my documents are also process attachments, then all of my attachments are all accessible through this particular area of the process timeline. All I have to do is open up the process timeline instance, and I have access to all of the forms or all of the document attachments that have been attached to the process. So it puts everything all in one place. If you attach documents to the form, which you certainly can, well, now if I want to see those document attachments, I can't just grab them from here. I now have to open up the form instance to look at my attachments, but I have to open up the process instance to look at all of my associated forms. It just makes things a little more confusing for you. But that is the form actions process timeline activity. So the custom task activity simply enables me to add a custom task. There are a lot of custom tasks. So when I select custom task from the activity type, it will give me a custom task tab. I'll open up that custom task tab, and you have to select and this has already been selected. So I don't want to delete it because I don't want to have to reconfigure it because it's already configured and it already runs. So let's do this. Let's leave the good one. Let me just create a sample one. So we'll just go to process timeline and we'll just call this AAAA so it shows up at the very top of the folder. And so I have my activity. I'm going to open it up. I will set this to a custom task activity. Go to the custom task tab, and now I have to select my custom task. That's the very first thing I do. So I'll have to go and find the custom task. On the other one, I think it's the convert to PDF. That's the easiest one to grab. So I'll just grab convert to PDF, and I'll click add custom task. It adds the custom task to my process timeline, which puts us back right where we were on the custom task timeline activity right here, which is activity 2, where I've chosen convert to PDF. And this will just convert the form to a PDF because there's no attachments, and it will just add it to the process. Now, if we kick this off, so that's the form. So let's run the form here. Where's my custom task form? There it is. We'll leave that. And I'm just going to check to see. No, I set it up so that I guess I set all of them up. I thought I had one that was kicked off by the form, but apparently I don't. So we'll just go back to custom task. Where is it? Right there. We'll just run it. And that will open up our custom task form since we're running all of these directly from the process. And again, we'll have to give it a second for the little spinny up here in the corner to stop while it compiles this instance of the form so that it can display it to us. And there we go. There's my custom task form. It has a control, which doesn't actually do much. But now I'm going to complete it. And of course, that completes activity 1 because I already opened it up in activity 1 when I ran the process itself. And I invoked the process. It automatically created the instance, attached the form, and ran it for me. So I've now completed the form. So essentially, there is no form submission whenever you run a process directly. And it's taking an extraordinarily long time to do what should be a very, very simple PDF conversion. But when the PDF conversion stops, I should have my attachment displayed. And the only thing I'm doing is just, converting the form to PDF and attaching it. There we go. And we'll go ahead and hit complete there. And we'll go back and look at my process. Custom task. There we go. Timeline should be completed. There is my timeline. So we will pop it open and we will look at our timeline items. And one of our timeline items is the PDF. So apparently I didn't set up a what do you call it? A show attach control on the form. Probably should have, but either I didn't set it up or I set it up incorrectly, but it doesn't matter because my conversion worked. And here is my PDF to prove it right there as one of the attachments for my process timeline. So here is the original form that was attached, yay. And then we just saw the PDF that was attached. Now, the one thing that I'm a little curious about is why it didn't display it on my form, because there is a show attach control, process all. It should go in the group name PDF. That may be the source of my configuration problem. So let's go back to our custom task. Let's configure our PDF, and we'll go to the advanced options, and there we go. That somehow got erased. I need this to go into the PDF group so that it gets displayed in my form. So we'll hit OK there. Let's run this one more time real quick. Fix that little misconfiguration. And again, we have to go through the whole PDF process. So that's a little painful waiting, but there we go. That's what we expected to see. There is my custom task, and then I can open it up, and there is the PDF right there. That shows me all of the information. There's not much information to show. It's just that, but at least my PDF shows it to me. So there we go. That is set up. So pro tip, we always talk about how group names are important, right? So on the form, when we look at our show attach control, and this is really kind of an aside, I have a group name assigned to it, PDF. So this show attach control is only going to show me attachments that are in the PDF group. So in my previous form instance, it's not showing me the attachment like it is in the one that I just did, because, and you have to keep this carefully in mind, whenever you are configuring your attach controls and your, in this case, your conversion controls, you got to be sure that those group names match. We recommend that you use group names anytime that you're going to do the conversion. But you got to remember, all of your configuration has to match, or you're not going to see things that you want to see. If you don't use a group name, your life does become in some ways a little simpler. So if I went into my form, so we'll leave that because I only have one group. I mean, technically, I don't really need a group name on this form because I'm only going to have one attachment ever. So if I don't set the group name on the PDF, this is not going to work. However, if I take that group name off and I save and close my form, now whenever I go back in and I look at the form instance that I just ran, we'll be able to see the attachment, because now without a group name, this show attach control will show me all of the attachments for the process. So if I go back in, and we'll hit OK here just to be sure that our form is saved. And if I go back here into my form instances and I look at, well, we know this form works. That's fine. It was this form that didn't work. Apparently I have deleted that PDF, but that's fine. It now works too. And it works because we are no longer specifying a group for this particular show attach control. So therefore, it's showing me everything. So key troubleshooting tip whenever you are using the convert to PDF, or any time that you're using the show attach control, if an attachment doesn't show up that you expect to show up, not a big deal. It's probably still there. So if you just go into the form and say, all right, let's remove the group name off of this show attach control, it should show you everything. And you should see your attachment. And if it doesn't show up with this group name, but it does show up whenever you take the group name off, then you know that your attachment is working properly. Your problem is you have a mismatch somewhere for the group name. So wherever that attachment is coming from, you're going to need to go back in and make whatever tweaks you need to make to be sure that that attachment gets assigned to the correct group name, like I just did here for this PDF custom task. So that is one of the key troubleshooting things. And if you just go in and remove the group name, you can skip a lot of steps because I don't have to go and look at the timeline instance and find its attachments and see if the attachment is there and then look at its properties to see what group name it has. I can just sort of figure that all out simply by going back to my form and removing the group name. Now, if you have multiple show attach controls on your form, you definitely are going to want to be sure that you've got a group name on those attachments so that you don't repeat the same documents in multiple attachments, right? So you can have 4 or 5 different attachments with 4 or 5 different attachment groups, and each one of these show attach controls will show a different set of documents for you. So let's move on to the branch activity. For the most part, when you do approval loops in Process Director, you don't need to use the branch activities. Back in what the kids call the day, the branch activity was the only method that you could use to create a loop in Process Director. So you had to hit a branch activity, you performed a rollback, it rolled back to a previous activity in the critical path, and you started it all over, and you had to set up the appropriate conditions and whatever to make the branch activity run. And that was okay, except that it didn't allow you to organize your process timelines into a noticeable loop, one that was visually distinct. It was just another activity on the timeline. And it was a little unwieldy. So back in version 4 point something, or actually it may have been version 5 point something now that I think about it, we threw in the ability to add an approval loop. And the approval loop is great. So we took the parent activity and we also turned it into a looping segment, which means that my looping segment is all contained as a child activity of my parent approval loop. And moreover, on that approval loop, I can go to the looping tab, which we'll talk about a little later whenever we talk about the parent activity, actually next. And I can add some conditions that allow me to control how the loop works. So when do I want to just jump out of the loop? If something happens, I don't want to do anything else in the loop. I want to go somewhere else. If another thing happens, I want to restart the loop. Or I may just want to keep the loop running forever until something specific happens. Maybe some data has changed on an external server, whatever it may be. Really cool. I can now do those loops. It really does make your life way easier than the branch activity used to, because you just didn't have those types of well, you did. You had the ability to do all of those things, but to do all 3 of them will require 3 separate branch activities, all of which use different conditions to determine whether they were going to run. It was tedious. So the approval loop is great. It does everything that you want it to do, except let's say that I have a case like this. So I have department approval. So whenever my activity or my timeline starts, here's what happens. There's a resubmit activity. Now that activity is going to be skipped on the very first iteration, because that is for the initial submitter to use if there are any changes required. So the very first time that my approval loop runs, I'm just going to skip this activity. It's not needed. It's only needed if someone down the line in the approval chain says, hey, I don't understand this. I'd like you to resubmit it with some changes. Okay, then the loop is going to restart and this resubmit task will run and my timeline initiator will have to make whatever edits they need to make, complete that task, and then it'll just kick back into the approval process again. So great, we're going to skip that the first time through. And then we're going to go to manager approval. And when the manager approves, it's going to go to department approval. And if the department approves, it's now going to go to the director, and the director will have the final say. Now, in any of these cases, anyone can say, hey, I don't like the way this looks. It's missing some information. I need more details, whatever it may be. This is wrong. I want this resubmitted. And so they can always hit a resubmit button. It'll just restart the loop, and it'll hit my resubmit activity, and the initiator will make whatever changes that he needs to make. And then we'll just go through the thing again. But I have a special situation. At the director level, maybe I don't want to restart the entire loop. Maybe all I want to do is send this request back to the department level. And if I do that, I'm going to need a branch activity to make that happen. So I'm going to want to return it to the department. So in this particular case, for this branch, we'll look at the needed when for it. If there is an activity result for the director approval activity that contains the word department, I should probably just click on it and open this up so we can probably see it a little bit better. So if the result of my director approval activity contains the word department, I'm going to want to kick this thing back. I am going to want to kick off a rollback, and I want to roll this back to department approval. So I don't want to restart the loop, but I do want to go back to an earlier activity. And that is the one use case where the branch activity, that's certainly the most common use case, where the branch activity is still enormously useful. So if we look at, let's say, department approval or manager approval, they don't really have any results. There's resubmit, there's no result there. But let's go to director approval. Director approval also doesn't have a result. Did I get rid of that? Okay. I may have gotten rid of that. So we're going to have to add some results to my director approval here. So we're going to add a result, and we're going to call it return to department. And well, we'll have to add another result. Sorry, clicked on the wrong one. We'll have to add another result. And we'll just call this one approve. And technically, I could have another result. Let me update it here real quick. I could have another result if we go into our approval loop. Okay, resubmit or deny. So resubmit jumps back to the top of the loop. Deny kicks me out of the loop. So technically, I could have a resubmit or a deny activity for my results for the director, but I don't need that to illustrate my return to department. I just need to have a result that contains department. So let's go ahead and save my process timeline, and let's just run it. So branch, there it is. We'll just run it. Okay. And there is my process. So here I am. I'm in. Okay. Well, I didn't configure the loop properly. I didn't configure this resubmit activity properly. So I'm still running it. The only thing I really care about is doing the rollback. So, well, let's go into my user profile, and Oh, that's still running. Let me complete that task just to get it off of the task list. So here is my task. I'm in the manager approval task. Very good. So I'm going to complete it. And then it's going to go to my department approval. So we're in department approval. So I'm going to go in as the department approver and I'm going to complete it. And now that task is done. Now I'm at director approval and I will open that up and let's hit return to department. So it will complete my task. And now I am back in the department approval task. And so I can complete it again. And I can have this little tiny mini loop running between director approval and department approval for as long as I want, but I don't want it anymore. So I'm just going to hit approve. And that will take me to my disposition task. So whoever does the disposition, HR, whoever, they can do what they need to do and they can hit complete. So my rollback worked. Everything is fine. Let's talk about how we make this happen. The thing that's important for branch activities is always the needed when tab, because you almost never want a branch activity to run all the time. So when you go in and you create your branch activity, you set the activity type to branch. You go to the branch tab, you figure out what is going to happen with that branch, but always remember you need a needed when tab because I need to specify when specifically I want the rollback to occur. In this case, I don't want that rollback to occur unless the director submits a result that contains the word department. Any other result, I want to skip this task. So the condition on the needed when tab is always super important because that determines when the branch activity is going to run and when it needs to be skipped. It's almost always, certainly for this particular type of implementation, it's always going to check an activity result for one of the prior tasks. It's also important to note that I might need multiple ones of these. Right now, I only have this return to department task, and it occurs right after the director approval task completes. But what if at the department level, I might want to turn it back to the manager? Well, then I'm going to need an additional branch activity between department approval and director approval so that after I complete the department approval activity, it hits my branch, reads through the needed when tab, and if it's needed, it kicks it back to manager approval. And similarly, if I wanted on manager approval to, well, on manager approval, the only thing I can do is return it to resubmit. I can just hit the resubmit button because it would only go back one spot anyway. So I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't need it for manager approval, but I might need it between department approval and director approval, just as I have it between director approval and disposition. The branch does three things. Now, rollback is the most common. I just want to go back to a previous activity. So whenever we use branch activities currently, then we're usually doing it in a rollback, and we're usually doing it for a configuration like this. However, it's not the only thing you can do with a branch. You have three things that you can do with a branch. Each of them have their own weird little limitations. Rollback has its own limitation. To use rollback, I can only roll back to an activity that exists in the critical path for wherever the branch activity exists. Now, in this case, that's not a big deal because I really only have one critical path. So in this case, I can actually roll it back to any activity in the process timeline. But that isn't always true. Sometimes I have more complex timelines that have multiple branches that they take, and sometimes this part of the timeline will run, other times it won't. And if those aren't in the critical path for my branch activity, I can't roll back to those activities, at least not via a rollback. A rollback works much like restarting an approval loop. It just works as counting as an iteration. So be aware of that limit. As long as we're in the critical path, I can do a rollback and iterate through my activities over and over again. Indeed, the iteration number will update every time I hit a rollback. The other two are even more complex and even more limited, and you'd have to think very carefully about when you wanted to use them. There are some questions, though, so let me get to those questions. Can I have a copy of the branch process timeline? I have a few PTs with this edge case, would make life so much easier. Well, since you are anonymous attendee, while you can have a copy of this timeline anytime that you want, I don't know who anonymous attendee is, so you're going to have to email me so that I can give you a copy. Because I suspect if I send an email to anonymous attendee, it's not going to make it to you. May be an odd question, but what determines the critical path? Not an odd question at all. The critical path refers to the dependency chain that exists in a set of activities. So let's click on director approval. So the immediate dependency chain for director approval is my predecessor activity. That is to say, the activity that must complete before director approval can begin is department approval. My successor activity, the activity that can only begin when director approval ends, is return to department. And there is a single chain that goes all the way back up to the top of this process timeline. You can call this the dependency chain. We call it the critical path. Okay, but not everything exists on a critical path, right? If we go back here to my process timeline down here, and let's just create a bunch of activities. And we'll, in this case, we'll make them all user activities. It doesn't really matter for demonstration purposes. So I've got activity 2 and activity 3 and activity 4. Great. And now I've got, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do that and that and that. And what the heck, we'll do this too. All right, so now I've got something a little more complex here. If I am in activity 4, I can trace my dependency chain or critical path all the way back up to activity 1. But if I'm in activity 8, my dependency chain or critical path really only goes back to activity 5. Nothing that happens in activity 1 through 4 has anything to do with what is going on in activities 5 through 8. These are two separate critical paths. There are no dependencies between them, so it's not right to say that they don't or can't talk to each other, but in terms of dependency, they are completely unrelated. So if I do a rollback in activity 8, I can only roll back to activity 5 from activity 8 because that's the critical path that I have for activity 8. Similarly, for activity 4, I can roll back to activity 1. For activity 10, I can only roll back to activity 9. So in this particular case, I have 3 different paths running for this process timeline. Now, it's perfectly possible that I might have a path like this, although I suspect at the end of the day, what is going to happen is that for one of these, I am going to, well, add a dependence, and I need to add a dependence on activity 4 and activity 8. and activity 10. We can close that. Okay, now here, I'm in a little bit of a different situation. So here, if I add a dependency there. So now for activity 11, I have an equally complicated problem. I have basically three critical paths because activity 11 has three predecessor activities. Activity 11 cannot start until activities 10, 8, and 4 have all completed. So for activity 12, I do have a critical path that I can roll back to any of these activities because my critical path all comes together in activity 11, which sort of concatenates the three critical paths that we're running, starting with activities 1, 5, and 9 when my timeline started, because all of these are all going to run concurrently, right? So all of the activities here in each of these critical paths, they're all going to run, well, they're all going to start at the same time and run in parallel. So all three of these branches are going to run in parallel. When all three quit, then we're going to unify them all back into activity 11. And so while my critical path for activity 8 can only take me back to activities 5, 6, or 7, my critical path in activity 12 can take me back anywhere. So for a rollback, you have to be in the critical path for a rollback to work. And as you can see, with a more complex timeline like that, the path I take is going to be, a little difficult depending on where I am in the process timeline. In addition to the rollback, I have the start and the jump activities. Now, the start and the jump activities do not have the restriction that they have to follow the critical path. So either has to be the critical path prior, like a rollback, or the critical path ahead. We don't care about the critical path anymore. We're beyond that now. Now we're just making stuff happen. Now, the way the start works is whatever activity you select is just going to be invoked and it's going to start. Please note, I am not going to stop the current activity. I am not going to stop where, or the next activity that's supposed to run after this one is still going to run. Once you invoke a start, what you're really doing is you are adding a second segment of the timeline to start running from wherever you say you want to run it. So, danger, this may not be a great thing to do because you are going to have two concurrently running paths on the process timeline. Sometimes for a complex timeline, it's useful to have, but you need to understand if you use a start, it's not going to stop your timeline from running as normally. It's going to go to the next activity that it was originally scheduled to go to. You've just started off some new stuff that's happening in parallel with the current run of this instance. So you can get yourself confused real quick. Jump is similar to start, except that it doesn't run two separate branches of a timeline simultaneously. It just jumps to wherever you tell it to jump. You can make it jump backwards. You can make it jump forwards. However it jumps, it does not count as an iteration. It's not a loop. You're just saying, forget everything. We're just going to go to this thing and make this thing happen. If you throw it 5 activities ahead, then you're going to skip the intervening 4 activities completely. It's just going to move the entire timeline 5 activities ahead. Or similarly, if you set it 5 activities behind, it's just going to move you to 5 activities behind and it's just going to do them. So The start and the jump have no constraints on where you can send the timeline or what activities you invoke. However, they do work a little bit differently. Start just starts from wherever you say to start, and it will run concurrently with whatever is currently running. Jump actually just skips to wherever you say you want to go in your process timeline. Start and jump are useful for complex timelines sometimes, but you should exercise caution about their use because once they get invoked, that's where you're going to go. And if you skip 5 activities that you really need to run, too bad, you said to skip them, so it's going to do what you tell it to do. Again, most of the time, you're going to use rollback, and you're going to roll back to, whatever the previous activity was, like we do here. And for a general loop, you would never use it at all. You would simply use a parent activity. Speaking of which, let's talk about the parent activity. It does 2 things. It creates these loops we've been talking about, like it does here. However, it does a second thing, which is it just organizes your process timeline into parent and child activities. The thing is, you don't technically need to have a process timeline that has loops in it, but sometimes it really is cool to be able to organize your process timeline into different functional areas, right? So here I have a loop. Activity 1, I can look in here and see that that's a looping activity. Activity 2 just has a folder icon. So these icons are important. That little red square loopy thing is actually loop, and that folder icon tells me that there is no loop. All it's doing is organizing my process timeline. I don't think I have it on this machine. I'm going to look, but I don't think I have it. I don't. So let's go to demo where I think it exists because I want to show you what used to be the only thing that you could do in a process timeline, but is now still sort of the secondary function of a process timeline, that is to say, the organizational function. So let's go to my content list here, and hopefully it still exists on Process Director. That's Template Library. Employee onboarding for Intertrode. That's cool. That's not the one that I want. Employee onboarding. It used to be maybe Chris has it down here, an employee onboarding, new hire process. This is it. This is the one that I wanted to show you. So yes, you can loop. So we have a parent container with iteration conditions, right? And that's cool. However, this is an employee onboarding process. So let's take a look at 3. I have the provisioning phrase. So I'm going to fill out a provisioning form, and then I have facilities activities. So the facilities activities start for filling out the provision form. I've got IT activities that also have to run. And I've got HR activities that have to run. These are all done by separate people in separate departments who don't really talk to each other, IT, facilities, and HR, but they all need to do their work at the same time, right? I've got to have office furniture in a desk. I got to have a computer sitting on the desk with a valid network login. HR, I've got to have training scheduled to do my onboarding training. So all of this stuff has to be done. It's all done by different people. And for each of these different types of activities, they each all have their own critical paths. So for, those are all occurring simultaneously. Let's see, facilities activities. Well, all of these are really quite complex in themselves about when stuff gets done. They have their own complicated dependency chains for these particular activities. But in any event, the fact is, I have individual dependency chains. I have different people doing stuff. Now, what I would probably do in a case like this is I'd probably also color the bars different colors so that, each one of these parent activities. So, and by the way, I can collapse these as well. So I have multiple parents. I have my top level parent, which happens at the provisioning uh, phase. And then I've got my facilities activities, my IT activities, my HR activities, my onboard activities that also run, but they don't run until after my provisioning phase is done. So my provisioning phase contains its own parent processes or parent timeline activities for the facilities, the IT, and the HR. And then, of course, each one of these parents has the individual activities that have to take place to make that happen. And indeed, in IT activities, it has its own sub-parent container called application access, where we have to install a PC and have to provide a laptop. Well, these are out of order. I think we'd request the laptop first, then we'd install it at the desk. And it looks like that is the order in which they appear, but looks like this activity should be up here. There, that makes a lot more sense. Request a laptop, then install it. In any event, that is one of the cool things that you can do with a parent activity. Now, what I would obviously do, as I said earlier, with each of these activities is I would probably change the color on them. So we'll just make a change to that color, and then we'll go to assign office and we'll give them similar colors. We want to tell the parent apart from the child activities. So we'll do that and that and so forth. So I think you get the idea. Well, I picked the wrong color. And one more. There we go. So for each one of these segments, and again, all we're doing is organizing things into different segments. It's kind of like we're making what would be a swim lane if we were using a normal flow chart, right? But if I have these all in different colors, then I can see which of these swim lanes, even though they're not really swim lanes, but each of these color codes gives me some information about who's doing what work when. So that is the one thing that parent activities do well. It's the thing they've always done. The looping stuff is relatively new. We just added that in version 4. I say just added it in version 4, but that's like, 2016, 2017. It's been there for years. Time sure does fly. So in that particular case, that all still works. But we've added the looping. And if you don't fill out the looping tab, then you've basically just got an organizational folder, a parent folder, which you can throw in child processes. But if you want to create a loop, all you have to do is go to the looping tab. If you fill out any one of these 3 properties, to repeat the loop, to jump back to the top of the loop, or to cancel the loop with the appropriate conditions about when the loop restarts or cancels or what have you, then it automatically becomes a looping segment. Just filling out one of these makes it a looping segment. If you don't fill any of these out, then it just becomes an organizational segment. I haven't filled out anything here. All I have to do is click that and hit close, and it's automatically a looping segment. It's not going to work very well because I didn't configure anything, but Technically, this loop will now repeat forever because that's how I've configured it. But if I turn that off, it goes right back to being a folder. The important thing to remember about parent properties or parent activities. First of all, when a parent activity starts, it automatically starts its first child activity. When the last child activity ends, which in this case is activity D, activity 1.4, when that activity ends, it automatically ends the parent activity. By default, the result of a parent activity is the result of the last child activity that was completed. So every time a child activity is completed, the activity result for that child activity is echoed as the parent activity's result. There is a setting in the parent activity where you can set the activity result, and again, it's on the advanced options. You can set the activity result to a list of all children or user results. So if you have 4 different child activities, and you set this property, then the result of the parent activity will be a comma-separated list of all of the activity results for all of the completed child activities. There are a couple of situations in which that's useful. I think in the normal order of things, it's probably useful not to do that so that you can just use the activity result of the parent to do evaluations that need to be done on a recurring basis, because the activity result for the parent is always going to change to whatever the last completed child activity result was. So you can always check to see what the last child activity result was simply by querying the activity, whatever the current activity result of the parent activity is. Whenever we are doing dependencies, you generally do not want to make a subsequent activity from a parent dependent on any of its child activities. So note for activity 2 is not dependent on what should be activity 1D. Instead, it's dependent on activity 1. Because remember, once a parent activity starts, it kicks off the first child activity automatically. Once the last child activity completes, it automatically completes the parent activity. So you can have whatever complicated stuff you want going on inside the parent activity, and all you need to do is make all successor activities dependent on the parent activity, not on any of its child activities. It's not universally true. I'm sure you can come up with some reason why it would be necessary to have a subsequent activity dependent on one of the child activities. But in general, we don't do that. In general, unless there's a compelling reason to do otherwise, we set the dependencies on the parent activities, not on any of their children. Where it might become necessary is if I need to have a clear critical path back to one of the child activities. But in most cases, if you're going to do that kind of rollback again, you're probably going to do it inside of this segment of the process timeline or inside this bottom segment of the process timeline, in which case your critical path really should only go back to there, right? I suppose it's possible that I might need to roll back from this activity back up to this activity. And in that case, I would need to have a proper critical path, but we're kind of getting into edge use cases. So you have the capability to do whatever you need to do, but realize that, some of these things are pretty out there on the edge and you're rarely going to run into them. The wait activity, you're really going to use this for one thing. Occasionally there's a second thing that you might do, but largely the purpose of the wait activity is to stop everything for a specified period of time. Now, some people think that if I want to stop my process timeline for 3 days, then all I got to do is just say, okay, we're going to set the activity type to wait. And we're going to tritty trot right over here to duration, and we're going to set that to 3 business days. And ta-da! Okay, not ta-da. No, that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen if all you do is set this, which, by the way, I see people doing it a lot. If you set just that, then what's going to happen is this activity is going to start. It's going to say, this activity is not needed, and it's going to immediately complete. And the reason it's going to immediately complete is especially, we don't have any results. We don't have any completed when conditions. Well, if we had needed when conditions, we might not even need to run. Okay, well, there's nothing to do here. So sure, it says duration is 3 days, but I'm just looking over this. There's nothing to do. So we're just going to end it now. And it will immediately end and move to the next activity. And the reason is because you also need to do some configuration on the due date. Now, if you are on 6.1.300 or higher, we're going to make your life a little easier. It's actually going to work because we've changed the defaults. For every prior version of Process Director until now, this has not worked because the settings on the due date tab were different. The settings on the due date tab by default were this. Now, wait a second. I set this. I calculated this. You know what? We need to go back and take a look at what the defaults are now. Wait until at least due date. This is what it should say. Let's go back to my AAA. I want to be sure that we do this right. So let's go back to AAA. Let us create a new activity and let's open it up. Let's call it a wait activity. And by the way, I'm on .400. So I'm on what is the release candidate post beta. So I'm on a, no, not on this server. No, sorry. Take it back. On this server, I'm not on 400. So let's go back to due date. Okay. This is calculated from actual activity start. So this is changed. Calculated from actual activity start is changed. The default used to be calculated from minimum of actual or configured activity start. That used to be the default. We've changed it now. So the default is calculated from the configured activity start. Oh, I'm sorry. From the actual activity start. So somebody asked us to make this change. So this is fine. This is what we want. It's still, however, not quite enough because proceed. Let's go. Because what is still set to default is take no action. So again, if we're not going to take any action, we're not going to do anything if the time limit expires, we don't care. So even though calculated from actual activity start, that's good. This is still not going to work. It's not going to wait for 3 days. It's going to end. Well, I said it 3 days. So it's not going to wait the way that we want it to wait. It will only wait if we have it calculated from actual activity start and we pick wait until at least due date. At that point, we now have a wait task that will wait for 3 days. So you can't impose a wait unless you set calculated from actual activity start and wait until at least due date. Because if you set it to anything other than calculated from actual activity start, it may not wait 2 days. If you have it set like for configured activity start and we're already late getting into it, it might only wait a day. So we need to say, all right, I want my 3 days. So we're going to calculate it from the actual activity start, and we're going to do nothing until we hit the due date. And of course, if you have it set for a duration of 3 days, the due date will automatically be set based on the duration you set. There is a couple of times when you might want to set a wait where you don't want the wait to complete until either some sub-process is complete or when a result condition is met. That's relatively rare, and you can set it up to do it when any condition is met. So you don't really have to worry about the if time limit expires because you don't really have a time limit. You're now waiting for either a sub-process is complete or a result condition is met. So you can impose those as well. Those are much more rare to do, but they do exist. Primarily, this is what you want. You're going to want to set a duration and then change these things, and you can make this thing wait for as long as you need it to wait. And that's primarily how you're going to use the wait task. The last two I think we can dispense of very quickly. The case activity doesn't do much. Generally, it starts a new case instance, adds some data or a process to an existing case instance, or it removes the process from an existing case instance. Most likely, you're going to create a new case instance, but a very, very, very close second, somewhat less likely, but still pretty likely, is that you're going to add it to an existing case instance. So I'm working in a process and I realize, oh, this has to be part of that case, then I can add it to a case instance. As I said, I don't want to, let's hit cancel because I clearly don't want to change this. So in this case, we're going to create a new case instance, and I have a copy of a case instance down here. It is case 10A, which is my case instance. And so there's not much to this case. It just has the current date time that gets assigned as a case property. So it's not very impressive, but what I do is I just start my case timeline, and the process has been started. There are no user activities or anything else. It should have just started a case instance, which it did right there on 3/6/2025. There is my new case instance that got started. And here's my case property stuff at 3/6/2025 at 11:52 a.m. So the case activity allows you to basically take a process timeline instance and add it to an existing case, or add a new case to, or add the timeline instance to a new case. And so it's pretty straightforward. Case is really useful, but a lot of people don't use it because they just don't have a need for that level of complexity in their processes. But if you do use it, being able to set that case up is kind of cool. Finally, there is the end process. Most of the time, you don't need this. I see a lot of people with process timelines, and the very last thing they do is they drop in an end process activity as the very last activity of the process timeline. You don't need to do that. Your process will end automatically when the very last running activity stops. You don't need to say, hey, we've done everything, now let's stop, because automatically, if everything is done, the timeline is going to stop. What you need the end process activity for is whenever you want to end the process timeline early, whenever you just want to escape it because of some condition. There's almost always a condition. By the way, no configuration for this thing. You select end process, you've configured it. It does one thing. It kills the process timeline instance instantly. There's no pass and go. There's no collecting $200. Your process timeline is dead. There's no takesies, backsies. There's no undos. It's permanent. It kills your timeline. You would have to manually go in and restart your process timeline as an administrator if this process runs. The only configuration that you need, but you always need it, is the needed when activity. Because most of the time, something happens in the timeline, which, if it happens, you want to end the timeline because that thing happened. So whatever that thing is, you're going to need a needed when condition to check for it. When it reaches the appropriate place in the timeline, if the thing happened, then it's going to invoke the end process and your timeline is just going to stop. You need to be super careful about this because there's no way to recover from it if this activity runs at any time. It kills your timeline. So be careful about its use. Be sure that your conditions are appropriate. By the way, you can only have one of them in a process timeline. So you have to put it in a very strategic place in your process timeline that everything is going to hit so that it can perform that test. So you need to put it both in the right place and you need to have the right needed when condition to ensure that it doesn't fire when you don't want it to fire. Assuming you can do those two things right, then the end process is useful. If you don't have any special need to end a process early based on a condition, you never, ever need an end process activity type. That's its only purpose. And if you just have a normal process, as you can see for all of these other ones that I've done, there's never an end process activity on any of my timelines unless I have a specific reason to kill the process because something I don't want to happen has occurred. Outside of that, the timelines end automatically and go peacefully to their rest when the last activity is done. So for those of you who have gotten into the habit of ending a end process activity as the very last activity in all of your process timelines, stop it. Don't do that. You don't need to. It's totally unnecessary. Yeah, it is literally a waste of your time to use the end process like that. So that's the last process timeline activity type. We did it. We covered them all. And having done so, it's time to move on with the rest of our day. Have a great week. We'll talk to you again next week. So long.